Well, the clock is ticking for Trump's new sweeping tariffs on dozens of countries to take effect, including on China. Let's speak to Yuka Roya, who joins me in the studio. Tell us all about it.
Well, Inka, the Trump administration says that tariffs that will effectively double the price of everything and anything that comes from China will take effect at midnight US time, even as it's starting talks with other trading partners. Under his second term, Trump imposed a 10% across-the-board duty on all Chinese imports in February, then doubled that in March. Plus, last week, as part of his Liberation Day action, he hit Beijing with another 34% tariff and on Monday slapped an additional 50%, bringing the total rate to 104%. This as China stuck to its planned dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariff of 34%, despite the threat. Beijing's earlier counter-tariffs on targeted US products are already in effect. Now, as a full-blown trade war nears, it's also taking action to protect its domestic economy. Brian Quinn has more.
Digging in as the trade war deepens. China's retaliatory tariffs of 34% on U.S. goods were met with threats from Donald Trump to hike America's tariffs on China by an additional 50%. Beijing showing little sign of backing down.
If the U.S. disregards the interests of both countries and the international community and insists on engaging in a tariff and trade war, China will fight to the end.
To shield its economy from the fallout, Beijing is loosening control of its currency, allowing the yuan to depreciate both domestically and on offshore exchanges, a move that should make Chinese exports more attractive to other trading partners. Meanwhile, new economic stimulus measures appear to be in the cards. Government investment funds have been buying up equities to offset steep losses on stock markets. Plans already in place to boost domestic consumer spending, encourage lending, subsidize exports, and even increase the birth rate are likely to be accelerated. On the consumer level, Beijing has an advantage. The U.S. imports far more consumer goods from China than vice versa, making tariff-induced inflation much more of a political liability for Washington.
I believe our country is quite self-sufficient now, so the tariffs might not have a significant impact on our daily lives, but they could affect some businesses related to imports and exports.
The recent heightened rhetoric from both sides suggests that direct talks between the two countries' leaders are unlikely in the near future. China's Communist Party newspaper announcing this week that Beijing is no longer clinging to illusions of a deal.
Well, Yuka, financial markets are having another day of volatile trading.
Well, global stocks actually rallied earlier in the day amid signs that the US was moving quickly to engage in talks with its trading partners, including Japan and South Korea. The White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt says nearly 70 countries have reached out for negotiations.
Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country. Why? Because these countries greatly respect President Trump in the sheer power of the American market. These countries realize they've gotten filthy rich over the past few decades by imposing substantial tariffs on American-made products and ridiculous non-monetary barriers to block out American industry. Deals will only be made if they benefit American workers and address our nation's crippling trade deficits. America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us.
Well, however, Wall Street started to run out of steam as it became clear a deal with China wasn't coming. After rising more than 2% in early trading, all three indices have now reversed their brief gains, with the S&P and the Nasdaq again sinking more than 1% each.
Well, China, meanwhile, is trying to get other nations on board against the punitive tariffs.
Beijing has called on the EU to jointly safeguard free and open trade. The EU, however, is more concerned about the possibility of cheap Chinese goods that are boxed out of the United States making their way to Europe instead. During Monday's phone call with China's Premier Li Qiang, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen discussed setting up a mechanism for tracking possible trade diversions and also called on China to negotiate with the United States to avoid further escalation. The EU itself is modelling its response to Washington. It's considering counter tariffs of 25% on a range of US goods in retaliation against Trump's earlier duties on steel and aluminium, while keeping American whiskey off the list. But Brussels insists on negotiations, with von der Leyen offering a 0-for-0 tariff deal on all goods.
The measures we come forward with achieve their intended purpose, which is to allow for the minimum amount of damage here in the European Union, while providing us with the maximum amount of leverage in our negotiations. And I repeat, and I will keep repeating until I'm blue in the face, we don't want tariffs. We want to avoid them. We didn't start the situation. We're trying to fix it. We're waiting for our American counterparts to engage in a meaningful way.
That was the European Commission's spokesperson speaking earlier today.
Yuka, thanks so much for that. We'll have to see how everything all plays out. Stay with